So, welcome to PaxEuropeana. I'm very honored to have a very special guest from Ukraine this morning. It's Sergij Nishinsky, who is the advisor to the minister or to the deputy prime minister for European integration, and is also has a long-standing record already in the 7 years since Euromaidan as a deputy minister for social affairs, and has also been one of the activists in Euromaidan. I'm very much honored that you take time this morning to discuss with PaxEuropeana, and I would like to welcome you very much and also give you the floor to introduce yourself to the international audience. Please, Sergej, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gunther, for your introducing. It's a big honor to be here in this Zoom area live now and speak with you and your colleagues. Actually, as you know, that really Euromaidan was a big wave of demonstration and civil unrest in Ukraine. And when it was begun on the night of 21 November 2013, nobody knows how it's finished. But all people come into the streets, to the central streets, to open the hearts, to open the all glory. And that's why this revolution, called it like Revolution of Glory, because since 2004, when we got first Orange Revolution, and it was there are nobody killed, nobody put in the prisons, but now another situation. 2013, situation changed, and government and pro-Russians spy soldiers was very active. They will kill people, and for us was very important to protect each other. And first of all, it's students, because the last step, it was when a lot of students was beaten on the Khreshchatyk central street in Kiev. But anyway, how you say that already 7 years, how the Revolution of Glory in 2013 finished, and the protests were sparked by the Ukrainian government's decision to suspend the signing of an association agreement with European Union. Instead, choosing closer ties to Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union in general. But for me, also important that after that, people started more consolidate, and people started more effective in government. They tried to change new steps for opening and reforms for society, and create new society, refreshing society. It was actually the main aim of the people who come into revolution. Of course, the situation escalated after the violent dispersal of protesters on 30 November, leading to many more protesters joining. And during the Euromaidan, there were protests and clashes with police throughout the Ukraine, especially at the Maidan. Personally, I was surprised because more than 2 million people was coming in the streets. And I remember actually around and maybe one or more, a little bit, billion people coming to Euromaidan in 2004 in Orange Revolution. But it was, as I told you, was another situation that troops started to kill people, and it was really shock to each one of us, like students, like protests. And of course, I remember the time when in 2013 I finished my research in civil law, and I remember when I come into the streets and joined to the protest, my colleagues, my students, my friends from the other jobs, but it was really a dangerous situation. It was difficult situation. During this time, I remember when finished this situation in 2004, because it was, post-revolution syndrome, when people still on the situation of disoriented, of situation of understandable of what happened exactly in the government, because government was also broken. And when Poroshenko is coming in 2014, of course, people felt that it was the spirit of the Euromaidan coming, and a lot of people joined. I remember when I just back from the United States, because I was studying in Washington D.C. in some National Attorney Association program, and it was for public policy and policy making program. And when I finished this course and coming back in Ukraine, I decided to, of course, to join the government again, and start in immigration service in Ukraine to help all our refugees and IDPs who live in Ukraine and coming from the east of Ukraine and move to Kyiv city especially. Also, it was the time when we joined in 2016 in cabinet ministry of Ukraine, where actually my career started and growing. And of course, we create export strategy of Ukraine, the first strategy when Ukraine got really some plan and objectives, because there are nothing, and without objectives, the government was working whole these 25 years. But now already this year, as you know, Ukrainian independence, it's 30 years, and I hope that in this date will be real understanding how it's difficult to get independence during thousands years when Russia on your border. Some of my friends asked me, but yes, you're a young country. Other my friends from Europe said, yes, but you're old country, because your language from Kievska Rus coming a long time ago, it was thousands years. And after that created Russia, Belarus, and other countries. And I every time answered that, yes, it's true, but you can imagine how it's difficult to protect independence when on the borders Russia. And now we see that Russian aggression, unfortunately, every day is coming, and the escalation and the situation now on the borders. You heard, I think, that also today the G7 countries declaim that they protect Ukrainian sovereignty and dignity, because Ukraine, it's first step. Second can be Poland, second can be Germany, second can be other European unit in general, in the European countries. And if we are not protect Ukraine, it's only first step of some behavior of Russian troops and Putin, of course.
It's a very dangerous situation today in 2021 again, with the Russian troops amassing at the Ukrainian-Russian border. And it's all connected, I think, to the pro-European direction of Ukraine, which started at the Euromaidan in 2014. You were personally there, and it was one of the key turning points of European history, maybe the key turning point of European history in recent years. And can you describe how was the mood of the young people who carried this revolution? Did they want to join Europe? Was Europe in the center? And is there a pro-European sentiment in Ukraine today?
Well, as you know, actually one of the big challenge for Ukrainians, it's when Yanukovych, previous president, who is running to Russia now, and who was actually the protection from Putin, he said to European Union that he will not sign agreement between European Union and Ukraine, as a result of long-time negotiations and the agreement on settlement of political crisis in Ukraine, as you know, was signed in February 2014 after this situation. And people coming to Maidan, to Hryshchatyk Center city, and protect and claim our European movements in future. And actually it was the one of the big challenge for all Ukrainians to protect their future future spirit and maybe future like as a country, because everyone knows that there are two ways for Ukrainians, or European way, or again pro-Russians, pro-USSR way, because we every day watching TV and looking what happened in Belarus, and actually its movements what can be 10 years ago, 16 years ago in the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. And we of course protect the situation. We felt this, and finally that we will fight for our dignity, and now we have some results. But of course there are, you know, in Ukraine, like in all countries, there are two situations and maybe some problems. It's of course our behavior on the borders and in general, like the geopolitical position, and of course inside situation when we have some big gaps as corruption, as uninvolved process in digitalization reform, especially e-governance and economic growing, and of course it's our problems inside the country. But of course the main challenge, it was fighting in Kiev in February 2013.
In 2014, Russia punished Ukraine already twice. First, for the pro-European direction. First with annexing Crimea in February, March, and then later also with starting the Donbass war. Do you think that Russia did it on purpose to punish the pro-European direction of Ukraine? Or what was the reason for these two aggressions against independent Ukraine in 2014 and ongoing?
You know, as you see, the historical all movements between Russia, Ukraine, European Union, a lot of historical persons can confirm that Ukraine, it was a big agriculture potential for all Europe. It's a big territory with amazing land, with amazing agro opportunities and opportunities for whole the Europe. As you know, and you see the strategy 2030 in FAO, Food Organization Program, the big gap in our future, it's actually the poor people, and a lot of problem with the lands, with the products, and the hungry people. It's actually our future in all the world. That's why the countries like Ukraine, in accordance of their geopolitical territory situation and amazing lands, gave opportunity to streamline all products, export policy, trade policy with Europe, and promote their goods to new markets. Because as you know, 19.5 export products goes to Russia. It's amazing, because all Ukrainian SME, they cannot have opportunity to grow it. They cannot have opportunity to show their effective products to European Union and also in China. Because as you know, there are no any companies before in trade in China. They was every time Moscow was in the middle between agreement of Ukraine, China, Ukraine, European Union. And when we pick up all documents, we saw that a lot of Russian companies was inside and was between the trade memorandum and trade agreements between our SMEs and big agriculture holdings. So what we can say that really very important to streamline these agreements, to arrange the process when all contracts should be direct to European Union, because as you see during these 4 years, market with European Union growing per 65%. It's amazing. It's amazing. And of course, we're growing with China. It's 98% just for 1 year. It's really amazing situation. And by the way, also Ukraine and China are interested now in the liberalization of export for Ukrainian companies. And as more than 60% of Ukrainian export is oriented on China now, because it's huge market. And we have the problem also in China that they cannot give permission to export honey, milk, meat, because Russian spy policy was, or you working with Moscow and with Moscow company, or nobody should not touch Ukrainian SMEs. So now the diplomacy policy and our government relation between China and of course European Union gave opportunity to get direct contract between our countries and of course growing GDP.
So you have also been responsible for drafting the export strategy of Ukraine, and the economic situation of Ukraine has completely changed since 2014, and it's reoriented towards the European Union and China now.
Yes, but China is not, only exports. China actually it's opportunity for investments, because a lot of people talking about the export, but I prefer to talking about trade in general, because trade is more globally, because it's also import, it's also investments, it's also export of services, not only goods, and because services for some for example, infrastructure project, it's also amazing opportunity. But also we have some gaps. For example, in 2017, Kyiv city as capital of Ukraine signed memorandum with some infrastructure company in China to build a few stations in Ukraine, metro station, underground station. And unfortunately, during 4 years, there are no any movements. So we already have this memorandum, but there are no any movements from China side. Of course, China and has the strategy per 100 years. Ukraine has strategy per 5 years. Maybe in some reason it's plus, maybe minus. For China, maybe it's plus, and they, in accordance on one belt, one way, can plan the big strategy in infrastructure. But for Ukraine, very important to do everything now, because we have no time for any for any revolutions. We need to build as soon as possible what we already got, because we have every time using sometimes Israel practice, because this country every time in the situation on the war, they every time felt some dangerous border situation, and they know how, for example, to live in this situation. And very often our historical persons, they give this example, because it's really sometimes true. We now felt every time Russians windy from the east and from the sometimes Crimea, because a lot of ships and troops there. So,
Sergej, one of the big challenges was also the refugee disaster, which started with the Donbas war. You were also personally responsible to help the refugees from Donbas. And can you describe some of your activities and how big the challenge was in 2014 and 15?
Yes, actually, in this period, I was working in immigration service of Ukraine, and I remember how many people coming from the east to the Kiev, to other cities, and just looking simple things is to find the job, to find the work, to find the accommodation, and of course to find opportunity how to integrate in the center of Europe. Because sometimes people who live in the east, close to the border of Russia, they felt and really Ukrainians. Yes, they speak Russians, but they felt Ukrainians. And that's why they come in and to bring peace and bring all behavior from their region to Kiev. And very important to integrate. It was integration in Kiev city. Of course, dangerous and difficult situation when some of them got Russian passports and Russian IDs and Ukrainian IDs. As you know, Ukraine got only one citizenship, and now already Parliament reviewed the legal act about the two citizenships for Ukrainians. In my opinion, as a chief of Migration Law Committee of Ukrainian Bar Association, it's very early to speak about this, especially if we have a war on the east in general situation, or if it's necessary, because of course, west of Ukraine, some of the people of Zakarpattia region, it's a border with Hungary, border of Romania, border of Slovakia. They already got Hungarian passports, and we have sometimes, unfortunately, diplomatic situation when Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary talking a lot about protect Hungarian citizens in Ukraine. It's felt like scenario number 2 of Russian escalation. But in my opinion, in government should be only people with Ukrainian citizenship. In government should be people who the first line families also got Ukrainian citizenship, because we are now living in the situation when people with Russian passports in Ukraine, it's dangerous for the government relation, especially. And that's why very important to streamline all databases between both countries, first of all. Also, with our agreement of the extradition and criminal assistance in accordance of Convention 1959 of assistance of criminal behavior, gave opportunity between Ukraine and Russia to get information in accordance of this convention of each other's person citizenship. But now I think we are hurry to talk about the mutual citizenships and to get 2 citizenship for Ukraine. This is my personal opinion, as I told you, as Chief of Migration Law Committee.
Sergej, then you were appointed to be the coordinator for strategic planning in the Ukrainian government, and you have drafted a number of very important strategies to integrate Ukraine into the European Union and also to reorient the economy. Can you describe this activity, how that was, and what was the main priority of your work?
Yes, well, actually, you're absolutely right that our government strategy in 2016, it was the first document in our independence Ukraine, when we got not only strategy per 5 years, we actually got the action plan, because important to create some tests and some information about strategy and priority, but also important to get action plan. And beforehand, it was like everything is priority. It's not true. It's impossible to realize any movements from the parliament, from the some citizens group of region. It's impossible. That's why the government decide and choose 5 objectives since 2016. It was economic growing, it was e-governance, it was human capital, of course, it was the anti-corruption and security, and of course protection of our borders and escalation of the Russian troops. It's actually the 5 main goals what we got still until today, and the action plan created in accordance with these 5 objectives.
Also during this period, it was in the constitution of Ukraine written that Ukraine wants to be a NATO and EU member. You know, what is the direction of your country? Do you really want? Is this a widely shared opinion? And what is your opinion about the European Union response to that?
Thank you for this question. Actually, it's very, very sensitive and very actual question, in my opinion. Of course, every one of us, of Ukrainians, understood that our troops, our equipment with our aggressive country on the east, it's minimum what we can show and protect any cities. It's true. We're talking a lot, and maybe more than 20 years, about the NATO. We already signed a lot of agreements and passed exams with NATO and European Union that we are ready and already prepare a lot of information and doing a lot of exercises in accordance with this. And in my opinion, Ukraine is ready to be in the NATO. Also, as you know, since 2014, when Ukraine signed the memorandum and agreement actually between the European Union and Ukraine, why the actually people coming in the Euromaidan, also since this year started realize other stipulations to these NATO agreements. And as you know, that a lot of job doing Olga Stefanishyna as a deputy prime minister for this job, Ivana Klimpush-Tsentsadze, who previous was vice-prime minister for this position. And actually all the Office for European Integration doing a lot to promote this situation in Ukraine, to protect all our security equipment and actually modernize our equipment, because as you know, that when we're talking about NATO, it's first of all of accreditation and modernization of equipment. It's actually educated people, and especially educated since English language until European behavior and the working with European standards, modernization and other things. And when we also talking about NATO, it's first of all, it's creation of a generation who want to protect country, not by paper, but also by hands and by equipment.
So you think Ukraine is ready technically to join NATO now?
I'm absolutely agree and sure that Ukraine is ready. And of course, we have pro-Russian party in Ukraine who still involved in this process and spend thousands of dollars in promotion, anti-promotion, that it's bad for Ukraine, that we need to go to Russia and other bad things. But anyway, it's new generation of Ukrainians, they more and more independence. They every year of our independence, it's creation of our new nations. 30 years, if my age is 37 now, so you can imagine how many new people, the generation of Z, Alpha, coming in Ukraine, born in Ukraine, and they Ukrainians. They are not born in USSR. They born in Ukraine, and that's why they more knowledgeable about independence and how it's difficult to get this in our country. So that's why I believe in our society, and I felt that really, maybe in my opinion, more than 19% of new generation, it's people until 35, until 40 years ready to go to NATO. Maybe the people who is oldest, who was born in USSR, especially the age like our grandmas, grandpas, they may be still afraid in general any movements of security, any movements of military in country, because whole their life they live under the aggressive of KGB, aggressive of Russia, and they in general don't want to touch weapon anywhere. So that's why it's actually there's some phobia and of these people, and of course we understand that, because everyone has grandpas and grandmas, and they know how it's difficult to discuss about that. But of course, all of Ukrainians want to quality protection of our countries.
Sergej, in 2019, you were appointed Deputy Minister for Social Policy and also for EU integration of the Welfare Ministry. Can you describe also the future of Ukraine in the European Union? What was your experience in the response in cooperating with the European institutions? And do you see Ukraine as a full member of the European Union?
Absolutely, Ukraine already, in accordance of their behavior of social policy, already in this statute of European countries. And I remember the time, then last year I was declaring our gender equality rights in Ukraine, because as you know, in Ukraine, nobody talk about gender equality. Nobody talk about domestic violence. Nobody talk about trafficking in Ukraine. But Ukraine is still on the leaders from the end of the list, unfortunately. And the trafficking in Ukraine is one of the big problems, especially in the children, especially in the west of Ukraine, on the borders, east of Ukraine, with IDP situation. And as you know also that in accordance with the program PULSE, it's the database program of European Union, when European Union can just to review what kind, in some points of European integration in accordance of association, other any ministries and ministry policies already done. And for me, it was a big honor that in 2019, Ministry of Social Policy was number 2 in all government organization who finished all exercises of this agreement and actually gave 100 results of per 2014. It's of course a lot of it was really a lot of work, but I think that it was very big, our victory inside of the country. Now, unfortunately, the situation another, and a lot of rates goes down, but I believe that I'm every time positive, as you know, that I every time believe that it's maybe temporary situation, and we will change this as soon as possible.
Let me ask you, because you also have a strong legal background, you worked as a prosecutor as well. The situation is how much of the regulatory alignment of Ukraine with the European Union has already happened in terms of the takeover of the DCFTA, for example, in your area in social policy?
Well, if we're talking about, for example, cooperation between police, our police, General Prosecutor's Office, and especially with Ministry of Social Policy, because it's also very close questions, especially in the trafficking, domestic violence. It's on the border of obligations and social behavior. And when we're talking about these topics, of course, Ukraine signed a lot of obligations with the European Union, and with some huge job action plans about this. And as you know, that if we talking about domestic violence, and now we are trying to resolve and growing process of obligations for the measures for people about these bad things. And also we're talking about the growing and create shelters for the for domestic violence. As usually it's women, because a lot of women, unfortunately, they under the domestic violence, or the East or the West. Also, we have the post-Vietnam syndrome, when a lot of combatants come into the home, and they still very energetic, aggressive sometimes. And we also need to protect these people and to try to integrate them again in the families. And it's a huge job in social policy, in the prosecutor's office, because when combatants back in Ukraine from the fields of the war, of course they need to assist, they need psychological assistance, they need job, they need every time to remind for what they do in this to protect their lives. But so we have complex and a lot of problems in social policy, because you will never find a country after maybe Armenia and Azerbaijan who has a lot of people of IDPs. Ukraine got 1,410,000 people of IDPs. You can imagine about this calculation. So it's all people who need to integrate in their native country, because as you know, everyone need job, everyone need food, everyone need accommodations and other things. If we're talking about some resolution and obligation in our criminal law of domestic violence, and especially the trafficking, of course, the main our gaps, it's there are no a lot of order by court, because court actually the last instance in Ukraine who can give really informations of our protection and our obligations for this trafficking. And of course, when we have a huge job of prevention policy, if we have a huge job of obligations in accordance of criminal law in policy, we need to get conclusion of the court about this. And without conclusion of criminal case especially, we cannot move in the future. It's actually one of the big gap in this case in our country.
Sergij, you are also the founder of an NGO to fight against corruption in Ukraine, and you have also contributed a lot to the fight against the corruption. Some people in Europe think that Ukraine is very corrupt and cannot join the European Union because of it. Can you describe the progress in the last 7 years in this important area to improve the fight against corruption in Ukraine?
Well, you know, personally, as a lawyer, and who every time who actually finished research in corruption in civil law, and working in general prosecutor's office in Ukraine, and create anti-corruption objective in accordance of our strategy in cabinet ministry, I can tell you that yes, Ukraine, unfortunately, a lot of middle level of government, for example, also corrupted in accordance of our audit, what we are doing before. But I cannot say that in United States or other European countries corrupted more, less. or more better situation than in Ukraine. Believe me, I visit a lot of countries, and every countries, since US until China, until Brussels, until Vienna, got same situation. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, when we have the situation that we have the war and some, pro-Russian troops and pro-Russian parties in Ukraine, of course, we have this test that corruption in Ukraine is one of the big gaps in the policy in general. But I see the behavior of our people very important, that really new generation don't want to live in the corrupt country. They don't want to contact with the government services, and that's why we burn DIA as a big, I think, the plus and positive things in e-governance in Ukraine. Then in your smartphone, you got your passport, you got ID, you got your driver license. It's not only picture, it's actually protection in accordance with the GDPR convention, special ICO, when you can use in banks, in government service. And as for me, this e-governance solution is number one in the Europe and maybe in the world, because nobody in the Europe got this opportunity in the smartphone, got your personally ID cards, other things. So you can go to notary, you can show your driver license to police by road, you can go to the bank, you can get your tax service by computer and just put your information and just show Face ID or put your special code. So minimization of contact of government service, it's amazing solution to, and of course, prevention for the corruption. As for me, these steps, the best solution for not only for Ukraine, for all countries. But also I know that for example, in Switzerland, 1 month ago was some small referendum in cantons, and people decide to be growing in digitalization reform or not. And 52% scare about their personal database information, and they vote no, we don't want to grow in digitalization, it's dangerous. I think Ukraine, its country, we are not losing nothing if we are doing in digitalization reform. Maybe we will win in this situation, because our rates in accordance with Transparency International may be a little bit better after this, and it's also big steps for the future and the minimization corruption. As for me, it's the best solution for minimize corruption.
Ukraine is quite famous for the progress in digital procurement, but also in digital payment. Ukraine is quite a world leader.
Absolutely, and as you know, in accordance with our action plan of IT solutions, only 16 big companies of Ukraine already won big procurements agreement and contract with Canada, United States. A lot of IT specialists moved to a European Union, but now when we got this opportunity with European in accordance with European agreement between Ukraine and EU, all specialists still in Ukraine. They working, of course, in some companies in the European Union, but they still there in Ukraine. They pay tax here in Ukraine, and they working by Zoom, they working by other society channels, and they actually brings money to Ukraine. And of course, it's reputation of Ukraine that IT specialist still is #1 in the world. It's true.
Sergej, now you work as an advisor for the Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration. Can you tell me why is Ukraine not a EU potential candidate country like Bosnia and Kosovo already, and why there is no clear EU perspective for Ukraine to this moment?
Ukraine is potential country for European Union, and it's only time and aggressive of Russia stop this process. And in my opinion, it was same situation with NATO, I can say. But in my opinion, as the advisor, first of all, for the GR and for our China Coordination Committee in Cabinet Ministry, I can tell you that really important to promote, first of all, inside of Ukraine, all our steps, because until we have no oriented of the citizen all our reforms, no, if people do not touch this reform, if people do not feel any movements, they cannot understand what kind of actual reform was realized. So that's why citizenship or citizen-oriented and society-oriented of reform is number one of our strategy of Ukraine. And doesn't matter who will be prime minister, doesn't matter who will be new president. Important that new government do not destroy export strategy, do not destroy strategy of government, do not destroy any movements because it was previous government. It's big mistakes. Important to continue long time to our aim to be in European Union, because Ukrainians already more Europeans than they were in post-USSR country. Now we show to all the world that Ukraine is not Russia. Ukraine got language, Ukraine got historical, a lot of things. Ukraine is the center of Europe, and first of all, it's a gate to Europe. And that's why very important for us to show, not for only Europeans, and also for Ukrainians, to more respect themselves, to protect their families, and fight for our rights and of course for our territory.
Sergej, you know many of the European countries. You are very well traveled and you work professionally also with many of the diplomats from the EU member states from 27 countries. Which of the countries are very close and very supportive of European Union membership of Ukraine, in your view? And where would you send a message that maybe some countries could be more supportive still in the future for EU membership of Ukraine?
Well, we have interview, first of all, personally with me, not like advisor of Vice Prime Minister. So let me be continue and to give some vision about this situation personally. Of course, and it's not secret for all the European Union that Lithuania, it's the big friend for all our reforms, especially in NATO, especially for European Union. And the president of Lithuania, she's really amazing woman who every time support in any reforms Ukrainian government. Doesn't matter it was 5 years ago any government, Poroshenko, or this government, Zelensky, doesn't matter who are in government in Ukraine, she still continue in the reform in Ukraine. They give a lot of opportunity. They give, first of all, the number one voice of Lithuania in European Parliament, who every time care about Ukraine, and they know more than any post-USSR countries how to escalate Russian troops on the borders. Because as you remember, in 1991, it was the first country who got independence from the Russia. It was Lithuania and all countries on the borders. That's why they know how it's to fight, but they fight with the minimum risk I think 30 years ago. Now we got a lot of, unfortunately, people who died on the east. It's more than 10,000 people in official our accounting. But of course, Lithuania is number one for support. Also, Poland is close to Ukraine. They every time to support Ukraine in any things. We got the region of Ukraine, the people speak Poland language, they know Poland language, and a lot of Ukrainians in the European Union who, for example, moved to Europe. We're talking not about only labor migrants, we're talking about in general the people who live close, villages of close to the Poland, for example, that more than 1 million people live there. Of course, they sensitive to Ukraine, and they know what does it mean again to be on the border with Russia. They every time protect us, and that's why in the case of the NATO, 1 week ago, president of Poland coming to Ukraine and in Ukrainian language also to speak with our parliament and explain real situation in if Russians come into the country. But maybe what country, what kind of country would be more to protect Ukraine? Well, it's difficult maybe to say because there are no the position of country. We got position of European Union. You remember the situation when Greece coming to European Union and how European Unions, some of countries talking about this. Some of them talking positive, some of negative, but now nobody talking about this. It's one big family, and if you are in the family, there are small child, there are big child, but we all in one family, and we need to support each one, because only in this spirit we can live in the peace and without any aggression.
Sergej, you are one of the few in Ukraine who also knows many of the new candidate countries which want to join together with Ukraine. You know, for example, Albania very well. You have been traveling there. Can you describe a bit how is the cooperation with the other countries who want to join the European Union? Do you form alliances with Albania, with Macedonia, with Montenegro? Do you work together in the institutions with these countries?
Of course, Balkans is very also close to Ukraine, not only because we have sea ports between our countries, especially Croatia, very close to Ukraine in some other export trade relation. But Albania in 2017, it was the time when Ukraine signed a few agreements with Ukraine, especially to the trade of the meat, milk, and some agro foods. But unfortunately, it's for Ukraine, it's not big market like Albania, but for promotion their products, Albania is an amazing country just to promote new products for this market. Exactly, if we're talking about some trade relations, as usually Albania use Kosovo and Serbian port for trade relation in general. We'd like to of course to work directly, and as you know already, we have the direction flight to Tirana from Ukraine. Also we work with Odessa, our port, working with Port Dures in Albania, and they working well, especially on the not only agro goods, but also in the metal, also on the some forest spare parts for some furniture. So they working in this case very well. And of course, Albania can very nice gate for Balkans also, because you know the not very easy situation with Kosovo, because the position of policy with Kosovo, Ukraine, still not acceptable, like situation in the international area. And if you remember, our Ukrainian football team, when there was drought that we played with Kosovo, decide do not play in the Kosovo field, because it means that we are agree this geopolitical position with Kosovo, and that's why Ukraine decide to play this game in Cyprus. That's why a lot of things what we have think about this relation with Balkans, but also beforehand was very nice relations with Serbia until this country was cooperate very well with Russian gas company, and also, as you know, the Balkan countries and Belgrade opened the gate and arranged the tourism tour to Belgrade to vaccinate Sputnik 5. So as for Ukrainians, it's unacceptable, because to promote unacceptable vaccination, and especially without any international European, first of all, declaration of this vaccination, it's of course really big gap, and some Ukrainians try to understand this behavior, but we are still thinking that it's only business market in this case. That's all.
And there's also the Central European Free Trade Area, where Moldova is already member. And there's also a debate if Ukraine should join also Central European Free Trade Area. Do you think that would be a good idea, and that would help towards building a stronger alliance with the countries of Southeastern Europe?
Well, of course, we forget about talking about Moldova as a very close country to Ukraine and very big friend for Ukraine, because, as you know, the new president of Moldova, she was from the policy of Moldova when Ukrainian situation and revolution started, and she knows very well the situation. She speaks also Russian a little bit, and we know a lot about this new government in Ukraine. Also, the policy, if Dunai strategy, it's very important for us, and she support this strategy of Ukraine as one of the part of this big agreement, the countries who got Donau River in our countries. Also very important to talk about the mission of European Union EUBAM. It's in the border of Moldova and Ukraine, and EUBAM. This mission still working since 2014 in Ukraine, and they trying to keep and streamline all process on the borders. It's very important for us. And I think that a lot of people from the mission of EUBAM moving to EUBAM, and from EUBAM to Kiev or to Mariupol, it means that the very European Union control this and this, it means that it's a lot of people who understand this policy situation in Ukraine very well.
Idea is to create a regional economic area in Southeastern Europe. This is part of the Regional Cooperation Council of the countries of Southeastern Europe. And it's one option maybe for Ukraine to join that regional cooperation area and work closer with Southeastern Europe, and then join together in the European Union?
Maybe. Well, now we have discussion of some plan, but you know, very important to create and realize this action plan, but also very important to read news as minimum, and to get information from our security service of Ukraine that escalation of the borders of the east every day more and more. And you can imagine how you can work in the situation, and how you can work and promote reform if you felt that any days they can come in and involve in your territory and take everything like they are in the Donetsk and Lugansk and especially in Crimea. So that's why it's really difficult, especially talking with the investors of this case, and that's why investors choose in the west of Ukraine and the middle of Ukraine, and nobody can choose the east because some of them very sensitive. But for some China and the Russians, pro-Russians, China companies, they sometimes prefer to see all opportunities of the East because they know that any time it will be in Ukraine, and now everything is cheap, and they ready to invest in any factories, in any things in Ukraine. They understood risks, but they ready to the fight in the courts in the future with Russia. So it's also position, but anyway, we got the situation what we got.
Why is Russia amassing so many troops at the Ukrainian border? What's their intention? Do they plan to go to war again? Escalate the war?
If we streamline all our dialogues today, you see that every year Ukraine open new opportunities for European countries. Ukraine concentrate and sign directly agreements of trade with European countries and in the world, US, Canada, China. Ukraine lose a lot of money. Also, Ukraine wanna to show they are powerful in post-USSR country, in especially in the world. Russia they don't need Crimea. They need only peninsula for the soldiers baza in Mariti baza in Crimea. This actually same situation in Abkhazia, in Georgia. And we have situation when Russia don't need Donetsk and Lugansk because it's actually the territory of Ukraine, a lot of shafts, a lot of factories, a lot of other manufacture, and they don't need this field. They need only occupied territory and control from the east. They need Crimea for the control Bosphor, because only Turkey control Bosphor from other side of the country, and of course they need to control all area of this sea, because Abkhazia, they occupy Abkhazia, it's also the part of Black Sea. Ukraine occupied Crimea, it's other part of Black Sea, and only Turkish side who have Trabzon, Black Sea, it's actually only one side which Russia do not touch. I hope they do not touch also, but nobody knows of their behavior. As you see, yesterday when the president of Ukraine visited Erdogan and they discussing about protection of Ukrainian borders and the Crimean platform, because as you know that Turkish country, they protect Crimea and protect Crimean Tatar, Ukrainians, and all this territory. Of course, they talking a lot about Crimea. And after this declaration of protect Ukrainian territory in Crimea, Putin says that nobody from Ukraine, Russian tourists, coming to Antalya to spend time in the summer holidays until middle of July. It was 4 years ago, the same situation. So it means that it's blackmail, typical blackmail from the Russian policy and Russian aggressive Putin behavior to all countries. With Turkey, he's talking about by powerful about that they can lose money for the rest. From the European, he's talking in other things about NATO. With USA, we know how they talking also. So now it's I think Russia choose the the course for destroying their country. It's only time.
This week was a very big meeting between President Zelensky and President Erdogan, and also Ukraine has strategic partnership with Turkey and is also planning free trade agreement. How is situation? Is the Turkish partnership for Ukraine very important?
Of course, Ukraine is not only close country to Ukraine, because as you know, Turkish people, they every time calling that they are gate to Europe, and they every time fighting for Europe to be the part of European Union. But I think in accordance with the behavior with Miss Ursula von Leyen in Turkey, when she's not find the chair in these negotiations, it shows that it was playing with some policy strategic partners. That's all. And it was maybe, you see, this behavior of Erdogan, it was the show for the Putin. And yesterday with Zelensky, president of Ukraine, he shows the other things to Putin and for European Union. So he's playing every time, and in my opinion, it's his position personally, and they wanted to be also in the middle between Russia and European Union, and especially in Ukraine. And nobody knows also about the negotiations about Nagorno-Karabakh with Turkey and Russia, because everyone knows that without Russian blessing, this escalation and this situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, it's impossible.
Sergej, let me ask you about the Eastern Partnership policy of the European Union, because 6 countries are united in Eastern Partnership, but Belarus is in a big crisis, and Armenia and Azerbaijan have a war just last year. And situation is that we have 3 very pro-European countries like Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine who want to join NATO and the EU. Is it not better to have a new policy and prefer the 3 countries who really want to join the Western structures and to make some kind of special gateway to Europe for these 3 countries and not to have Eastern Partnership?
Well, Georgia and Ukraine joined to Georgia, I think, position and relation with the European Union, especially when we're talking about NATO. We every time together go into these NATO opportunities. Maybe Georgia will be first and Ukraine will be second to join in this team. But for me, difficult to comment this, because really the situation every day is changing, and we can only have just planning and maybe to discuss about the opportunity. But of course, any benefits and any good exams for European Union of Ukrainians and Ukrainian government, it's more aggressive from the Russian. It's true.
Let me ask you now as last question, the situation for European Union, because now 7 years you work intensively every day, very strong in various positions to bring your country towards European Union. What do you think? You're now 37, 7 years forward or 10 years forward. Do you think Ukraine will be already very close to European Union or might be already member of European Union? And do you want to contribute to that process?
I think we more than ever close to European Union, and for us very important to show that Ukraine is not only field and territory who can give amazing quality food, amazing quality export, agriculture and other things. It's first of all the educated well people who speaking well their languages, French, English, other European languages. Also the people who service of these people in any countries, especially in European Union, as you're talking about IT sphere, about agriculture, government policy, international organization, shows that Ukrainians ready to work in the European family, and very important that they already was there. Important that the territory and the borders, sometimes, of course, borders better to be border with Germany and Romania and Poland, but not with Russia. And it's actually explaining a lot in all our situation. And the reform during these 7 years, especially in e-governance, showed that Ukraine minimized corruption in all services of government. Ukraine want to grow in. Ukraine feel and felt every time independence country, but people wanna respect and live in European society together with Europeans family.
And you personally, you will work for EU membership of Ukraine?
Sorry?
You personally, will you work for EU membership of Ukraine?
Of course. I think I will, and Ukraine only win of this process, and this involve in the families.
Perfect. I want to also express, I hope very much Ukraine to be full member of European Union. You are very welcome, and that would be wonderful contribution to the European project to join. And I hope that you will have a strong role also to contribute to fast-track membership of Ukraine in European Union.
I hope too, and I see that a lot of our international friends who come in Ukraine every year, they said, yes, this year again something changing, this year again something changed. As for me, it's very big words for Ukrainians in this case.
Thanks a lot. I wish you now good luck. I will also close the recording.